Which is better, the Motorola Moto G 5G 2022 or the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. Now, these are two recently released mid-range devices from Motorola, and to see the most up-to-date pricing and availability, take a look at the various links in the video description. Now, I'm expecting both of these devices to be very popular at all the various prepaid carriers in the US all throughout 2022. So I definitely recommend, in addition to seeing what you can get these devices for factory unlocked, also seeing what deals your carrier is offering, because especially the prepaid carriers tend to offer really generous port-in deals if you're transferring in from another carrier. So who knows? Maybe you can actually get one of these devices for free or at a really big discount. Now, both of these devices were launched in May of 2022, so they're very recent. And they do share quite a bit in common, but at the same time, they do have many differences. So I'm looking forward to going over all of that throughout this video. Now, the first thing is, when it comes to the displays, they're both different sized and also feature some different technology. Now, with the Moto G 5G 2022, we have a 6.5-inch display compared to a larger 6.8-inch display with the G Stylus 5G 2022. And in addition to that, with the G 5G, we're getting an IPS LCD display at 90 Hz, whereas the G Stylus 5G has a 120 Hz display. So a faster refresh rate with the G Stylus, whereas even with the Moto G 5G, we're at least getting a slightly faster display at 90 Hz compared to the standard 60 Hz that we've gotten for quite a while up until the last couple of years with lower end and mid-range phones. So originally, having a faster refresh rate was something that you'd only be able to find with the more expensive flagship devices, like Samsung's S series, for example. But it is really cool to see that kind of lower end, mid-range devices like these ones are now getting that technology. Now, in addition to having different refresh rates, with the Moto G 5G 2022, we do have a 720p display here compared to 1080p with the G Stylus 5G. Now, I will say it is pretty disappointing that this phone is only 720p. However, by looking at the display itself, it is kind of difficult to notice that it is 720p, so they at least did a pretty good job with giving us a decent quality display panel. But that being said, with the G Stylus 5G, we definitely have a much better display, both in the resolution, of course, but also just the way that everything looks. Everything looks a lot clearer, colors are better and more accurate as well. But the good news is that both of these devices still have decently good looking displays, so you'll have no issues going on Instagram, for example, looking at various photos and watching video content. Of course, if you want to watch a video in the full 1080p, then you can only do that with the G Stylus 5G, but I'm glad that both devices do at least have pretty large displays, so you will have a pretty big canvas here to view all that content. So because of the lower resolution, with the Moto G 5G 2022, we have a PPI of 270 compared to a PPI of 395 with the G Stylus 5G. And then with the G 5G, we have a 20:9 aspect ratio for the display, so a bit of a more narrow but taller form factor here, but it's even more narrow and taller with the G Stylus 5G, as this features a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. The G 5G has an 81.4% screen-to-body ratio compared to a bit of a better 85.8% screen-to-body ratio with the G Stylus 5G. Now you can see here that both devices do have a little bit of a thicker bottom bezel compared to the other bezels, but both phones do have hole punches for the front-facing cameras. And with the Moto G 5G, we have a 13 megapixel front-facing camera compared to a 16 megapixel front-facing camera with the G Stylus 5G. Now, when it comes to internal storage, these are the factory unlocked models of the devices, so it is possible that if you do get them through a carrier, you will be getting less internal storage. But at least for these devices, they both feature 256 gigabytes of storage, and in addition to that, we also have microSD card expansion. So I really appreciate that we are getting that much internal storage. That's even more than most iPhones that are out there. So the fact that we're getting this much storage with mid-range devices definitely gives us quite a bit of value here. And I'd imagine that most people will not end up filling up even a fraction of that storage throughout the duration of owning the devices. But if you do happen to need more storage, then at least you always can add in a microSD card to offload photos and videos, for example. Now, neither of these two devices feature wireless charging, which is a bit unfortunate, but at the same time kind of expected for lower end smartphones. but they do both feature fingerprint sensors, and the fingerprint sensors on these phones are both located on the power button, which is very convenient. But let's first give this a try with the Moto G 5G 2022. Nice and fast and responsive. One more time. So definitely very accurate there. Let's try it out now with the G Stylus 5G 2022. Also very quick, and one more time. So very quick and accurate here as well. So it is really nice that not only do we have a pretty convenient placement for the fingerprint sensors, but they also do work really well. Because there are plenty of other devices that I've used that are kind of in the mid-range or lower end where the fingerprint sensors really aren't that accurate. So I'm glad that that's not the case here with either of these two devices. And in addition to that, they both support face unlock. So it is nice that we do have multiple methods for getting into the phones. Now, taking a closer look at the various cameras on the back of the devices, there are some similarities but also differences. So with the Moto G 5G 2022, we have a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera for close-up images, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera to assist with portrait mode. Whereas with the G Stylus 5G 2022, we also do have a triple camera setup, but we have a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle camera, then capture images at up to 118 degrees, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So out of these two devices, this is the only one that has an ultra-wide camera, which is really a great feature that I don't find to be a gimmick personally. I always use the ultra-wide camera when it makes sense. It definitely is a nice way to kind of change up the photos that you're taking. Whereas with the Moto G 5G, this is the only phone of the two that has a dedicated macro camera. Now technically, with the G Stylus 5G, there is a macro mode, but it doesn't use a dedicated macro camera. So you can at least kind of take pictures closer up, but it's not nearly as good as having a dedicated macro camera. But on the other hand, with the G5G, there is no way to really replicate an ultra wide angle camera, so it is a bit unfortunate that we don't have that feature at all with this device. Now both of these phones thankfully do support portrait mode for both the rear and front cameras, hence why we do have that depth sensing camera. So if you do like to use portrait mode, then you are covered with both of these phones. So here's how things look on the camera apps on both devices. This is with the main cameras on both. Then from here, with the G Stylus 5G, we can switch over to the ultra wide angle camera to fit a lot more content into the frame. So very convenient there. And then you can see both phones do have a button for the macro cameras, but there certainly is a difference here. So you can see with the Moto G 5G, we can get close up and things are in really good detail using that dedicated macro camera. Whereas the macro mode with the G Stylus 5G at least is better than nothing, but certainly isn't nearly as good as having a dedicated macro camera. So that's worth considering there. I don't really see not having a macro camera though as a deal breaker personally. In fact, I see not having an ultra wide camera as the actual deal breaker. So definitely I prefer the camera configuration that we're getting here with the G Stylus 5G. But this is a slightly more premium device, so it does make sense why we do have an ultra-wide camera with this one, whereas we don't have one with the G5G. Now, in addition to that, we can head over to portrait mode to get those nice blurred out backgrounds. And then we can flip around to the front-facing cameras in both devices to do the same thing. And then if you want to take standard selfies as well, you can certainly do that. And then you can see too, if we head over to the More tab, there's a lot of other bonus features with the cameras. So for example, you can take a full 50 megapixel ultra resolution photo if you want to. You can also do dual capture, so you can take a photo using the front and rear cameras at the same time. So that's pretty awesome as well. So it is nice that despite these being mid-range devices, not the highest end out there, they still do give us a lot of different features related to the cameras. Now there's certainly a lot of differences when it comes to the processor and RAM that we're getting here with the phones. So as far as the RAM goes, with the Moto G 5G, we're getting 6 gigabytes of RAM compared to 8 gigabytes of RAM with the Moto G Stylus 5G. And then when it comes to the processors, with the Moto G 5G 2022, we have the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor. And then with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, we have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. So as the names of the phones and the processors imply, both of these devices are compatible with 5G networks. Now in 2022, you can certainly get by without 5G. However, I certainly think it is worth future-proofing and getting phones that are 5G compatible, because clearly that's the way that things are heading. Now, when it comes to battery capacity, both of these devices do feature very large 5,000 milliamp hour internal batteries, so that's very impressive. You should definitely expect to get at least a day, if not two, of usage out of these devices, so I'm glad that Motorola did decide to give us batteries with such a large capacity. And then the software here is Android 12, and it is running Motorola's skin laid over, but thankfully, Motorola really just took stock Android and added in some extra bonus features. So I really appreciate that they didn't try to necessarily reinvent the wheel here or change things just for the sake of changing them. They genuinely added useful features to Android. So you're really getting the best of both worlds here. You're getting a near stock experience, but at the same time, you're getting those added in features that Motorola has incorporated into these phones. Now, another difference is NFC. So unfortunately, there is no NFC with the Moto G 5G, but there is thankfully NFC with the Moto G Stylus 5G. Now, I definitely prefer to use NFC whenever I can to make a payment. That's the technology that's used for tap and pay, for example. So if you want to use Google Pay when you're going up to a point of sale, unfortunately, you can't use that here with the Moto G 5G, but you can with the Moto G Stylus 5G. But now that we've gone over a variety of the different features with these devices, let's now take a closer look at the hardware. Now, both phones are made completely out of plastic, besides the displays, which of course are made out of glass. We have a somewhat similar form factor when looking at the front panels here, of course. We do have that thicker bottom bezel, but thankfully we do have hole punches for the front cameras. Now, taking a look at the left side of both devices, we have the slot for the micro SD card and SIM card. Then on the right side, we have volume up, volume down, and also the power button, which doubles as the fingerprint sensor. Then up top here, we have noise canceling microphones on both devices. And then on the bottom of the devices, we have 3.5mm headphone jacks. We have microphones with both, USB-C ports for charging and data transfer, and we have the main speaker. But the biggest difference is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we have the stylus. So certainly a very useful feature in my opinion. Another thing that I really like about having the stylus on the device is that it doesn't get in the way at all. So if you get this phone and never end up using the stylus at all, it's not an inconvenience to have here. It tucks away neatly into the device when you're not using it. And when you want to use it, it features a really convenient pop out, pop in mechanism here. So you can just pop out the stylus and then begin. If I can fit that, there we go, Motorola, kind of, there we go. So you can write, you can draw, you can do all kinds of different things with the stylus. To learn more about it, definitely check out my full review of this device, but it is a very useful feature, and it is something that Motorola continues to improve with each generation of their Moto G Stylus devices. Now, taking a look at the backsides of both devices, there are also some very major differences here. The camera modules look pretty similar, but beyond that, we have completely different finishes on the back of the devices. Now, both phones do feature kind of this matte finish with kind of a wavy look to it. Of course, it's a bit more dramatic here with the Moto G Stylus 5G, but in general, I think both phones do look really nice. However, I definitely do prefer the way that the Moto G Stylus 5G looks in comparison, but if you do end up putting a case on your device, then I suppose it doesn't really matter either way. But I am at least glad that we have some pretty decent looking materials on the backsides of these phones. So in conclusion, I think you would definitely have to be saving quite a bit of money on the Moto G 5G 2022 to justify getting this over the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. I understand that the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is a bit more expensive, but at the same time, you're getting quite a bit more here. So in general, it is quite a bit more of a premium device, and I think it is worth paying a little bit extra for. However, let's say that you can get the Moto G 5G for free at your carrier, but then you can only get the Moto G Stylus 5G half off, then I suppose that it would definitely make sense to go for the Moto G 5G instead. So again, it's tough to say necessarily which one you should get over the other because there are many other factors to consider, such as the various deals available, but hopefully this video helped kind of clear up the differences and similarities between these two phones. And one other thing that I forgot to point out earlier on in the video when I was comparing the processors is the test results that I got from Geekbench 5. So let me show you those right now, better late than never. So with the Moto G 5G 2022, I did get a single core score of 541 compared to 622 with the Moto G Stylus 5G. And then when it comes to multi-core, I got 1550 versus 1928. So without a doubt, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is the faster phone of the two, but at the same time, it's not like it's necessarily that dramatic of a difference here. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this comparison between these two devices, but this is the Motorola Moto G 5G 2022 versus the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.